The vibe is that, 1% is a digestible number. You hear 1% and it's like, oh yeah, who doesn't have a 1%? Of course we can do that, which is exactly what we want. And then the math verifies that, but it also kind of brings to light the fact that 1% of revenues is not nothing. So it's actually a very real commitment. And so there's that kind of nice balance of like, yeah, of course, like who doesn't have 1% to allocate to something that's important? But then it's also a very real number.
Hello and welcome to The Greener Way, the podcast exploring the people, ideas, and innovations shaping a more sustainable future. I'm your host, Michelle Baltazar. Now, when we talk about sustainability, and to all our dear listeners from episode 1, it's easy to focus on emissions targets, reporting frameworks, and all the ESG rules. But another question that is gaining traction right now is corporate responsibility. So what responsibility do companies have to give back? My guest today is going to talk a little bit more about that. Kate Williams, the CEO of 1% for the Planet, a company that encourages businesses to commit at least 1% of their annual revenue to environmental causes. Kate joins us to discuss why revenue-based, not profit-based giving is resonating with companies. Kate, welcome to The Greener Way.
Thank you so much.
Now, for those who aren't familiar with 1% for the Planet, tell us what is your model and what is the idea behind committing a portion of revenue to environmental causes?
Yes, and thank you so much for emphasizing revenues over profits. We appreciate that because that is a core piece of the model. So the way it works is that the businesses who become members of 1% for the Planet do so by not only making the commitment to allocate this 1% of revenues every single year, revenues, not just profits, whether you have a good year, whether you don't have a good year, it's an acknowledgement that it's a core piece of your operations. So these businesses not only commit, but then each year they implement this 1% allocation. On the other side, we are vetting a set of environmental partners to whom they can allocate this 1% across 4 impact areas: just economies, resilient communities, rights to nature, and conservation and restoration. And each business chooses where they want to allocate their 1% based on their strategy, what they're trying to do, and then we certify that they have done that. So it's a really important way for businesses to integrate this commitment, to integrate this action, to integrate impact in the same way that they build paying their staff, paying their rent, investing in core assets in their P&L and their balance sheet. This is a way that the planet and this giving back, this supporting and driving positive impact is built into the P&L and the strategy in the same way.
And what's behind the magic number of 1%? I'm assuming you would have thought, why can't it be 4% or 2% or inflation or index to inflation? Tell us why the 1% number is important.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I was not there on the banks of the Madison River in Montana in the United States where we were founded in 2002. What I have come to understand, and I've talked with one of our founders, Yvonne Chenard, about this number, is that there's both a vibe component and then also just like a math component. The vibe is that, 1% is a digestible number. You hear 1% and it's like, oh yeah, who doesn't have a 1%? Of course we can do that, which is exactly what we want. And then the math verifies that, but it also kind of brings to light the fact that 1% of revenues is not nothing. So it's actually a very real commitment. And so there's that kind of nice balance of like, yeah, of course, like who doesn't have 1% to allocate to something that's important? But then it's also a very real number. And the math of just calculating 1% is great because then people can just do that quick 1% and apply it to other parts of their lives to kind of understand what it means to allocate 1% to the things that you care about.
Now, when people think about giving, they often think about climate change. We're just talking about the last maybe 2 to 3 years where climate change has really become the topic of interest. But you've mentioned 4 channels earlier. Can you give us a sense of what do companies gravitate towards? Is there like a special kind of sleeve, if you like, that you're seeing a lot of support for?
Yeah, and it's really fun for us to be in the seat that we're in because we see what so many businesses are doing, and we not only see it, we're certifying it. So we have really great data on what are some of the trends and where companies are allocating their dollars. So again, our four impact areas are just economies, resilient communities, rights to nature, and conservation and restoration. And within those, we have their sub areas, which I'm not going to recite, but we're able to really get a pretty good granular look at what people are doing. And across those 16 areas, there is climate interwoven, but our overall philosophy is that it's really important that in the context of the significance of climate, we don't also forget the many other things that are often related to climate, but also just need our attention, that are kind of the way we're caring for the world that causes us to have such a intense focus on climate change. So the trends that we've seen are that one of the sub areas called resilient, or one of those four impact areas called resilient communities, is overall the most supported impact area, and it gets about 40% of the total contributions across our membership, which is really significant. And that makes sense to us from the conversations that we have with businesses, because resilient communities is right where people and planet intersect. And a lot of businesses are really thinking about that, about bringing environmental giving, about bringing the climate issue kind of closer to home. So resilient communities is significant. Rights to nature, one of those other impact areas, saw a 68% increase in the support of this impact area in 2025. It's still a pretty small one within our total giving, but that's an interesting shift just to see some allocation to that. Just economies also saw an increase. And again, those are all different strategies where this people-planet connection is really strong. And then just to buzz through a few other kind of quick trends, climate adaptation is one of those sub areas. That is one of our most supported impact areas. It's a sub of the resilient communities one, which I mentioned before. And it's one of our most supported. This climate adaptation is by far. It got about 25 million of our total giving in 2025 when we certified about 150 million. So 22% of all giving in 2025 went to this climate adaptation. So to your point earlier about how climate has kind of come to center stage in the last few years, we certainly see that too, because the focus on climate across our members has not always been the case, because we've been around for close to 25 years. So we've gotten, a chance to see some of those shifts. And then the last trend I'll share is that the biggest year-over-year growth also kind of taps into the climate spaces in renewable energy. So we saw total funding grew by 719% year over year, 24 to 25. And the share of total donations increased by 512%. So it is really a major funding priority for, and is growing within our total donation pool. So lots of numbers and trends, but just to put a little wrap on that is to share that the kind of two things I might pull out from all of what I just shared is one, that connection between planet and people, how things like climate, issues like climate are affecting people and communities is often where our companies are looking to invest in solutions. And then also just more broadly that, again, to your point earlier, climate is elevating within our impact areas as a focal point for a lot of our businesses.
That's really good to hear, because you have the 25-year timeline, if you like, where we can see the shifts. Here in Australia, we're all about higher cost of living and businesses under pressure, profits under pressure, revenues under pressure. So I can imagine that maybe some organizations have the intention to help, but they might have financial challenges. So what can convince businesses to maintain or even increase their commitments and continue on during tougher times?
Absolutely. A couple things that I'll flag there, because it's in many ways the most important question, how do we make this something that's really viable in our economy? And so the sort of two important call outs for this are, one, that in fact, this is often a really good business move. So we have some great case studies from some of our businesses who have been able to showcase that adding this 1% allocation into the P&L is not just like added cost. It's not just like, well, there goes 1% of revenues. It's actually a driver of many facets of business success, from customer loyalty, brand affiliation, and we test our brand every year, so we have some good data on that. Purchase intent associated with that brand. We see our companies trending to beat the market in terms of their growth. So we have like just great disciplined businesses who are making this work, and often finding ways that they're using their partnerships and their 1% story to address other operational issues, so they're able to kind of bring some costs down. So there's a whole package of ways in which businesses are seeing this and leveraging their 1% for the planet commitment as a way that they can make their business stronger. I was just at an event in Seattle, Washington, the last couple days, and spoke with a member there who really emphasized how valuable it's been for attracting employees, attracting talent, and retaining those employees, which is quite an important issue in the US and in Europe, and I imagine in Australia as well. Just as this world turns and as we, have remote work and things like that, being able to attract talent and retain that talent is really important. So that's one way in which, this becomes a really, meaningful business case, and why businesses, should really consider this not as a trade-off. The other piece is that taking a longer view of the economy is increasingly something that we're hearing businesses talk about as they're, setting targets, as they're thinking about climate, really realizing that long-term business viability depends on a healthy planet. And so embedding that thinking into the 1% is a really important piece of it. And then figuring out pathways to get there. And so one of the things that we've done is build flexibility into our models so that businesses can leverage things like in-kind donations of either product or services toward their 1%. So for example, we have cases where a marketing firm that's a business might build a website for a nonprofit partner. And that's huge value for that partner. And it's a way that that business is able to allocate, kind of pro bono. I don't know if that's a term that you use,
Yes,
but a
we
pro
do.
bono service to provide value to that nonprofit. And so that flexibility within our model has been a really important way that our businesses are often able to either bridge those years that are tougher from a cash standpoint and stay true to that long-term commitment, or step into this commitment for the first time.
Now, here's a cheeky question, Kate. A lot of the tech companies that now dominate, whether it's the US stock exchange or the Australian stock exchange, they are now on the level of billion-dollar revenues or hundreds of millions of dollars of revenues. How is your engagement with those tech titans, if you like, where disproportionately there's a lot of money involved?
Yeah, I love that question because any of you tech titans out there who are listening, this is a great opportunity for you. We do not have a strong presence in the tech space at this point. It would make a lot of sense for us to, because they often have larger margins, so that 1% of revenue is more manageable. That's just not an area where we've had huge success, but we have some really strong members in that area. For example, Data Snipper, based in the Netherlands, is a strong and active member with us. And some other All Trails, people might be familiar with that mapping app. So we do have some great examples of it working, and it's just an area of growth for us. Beyond that, we have really good diversity across different sectors. So we're in about 60 plus different sectors, from shipping to apparel to professional services to outdoor industry, like really across many different categories, not simply consumer products, but also those services. And as we've grown in that services B2B space, I think that creates some new pathways for tech to join in.
Amazing. Well, if you're listening, and we have a lot of pension fund sustainability professionals that listen to us, and what we're seeing is the impetus for these companies to work with them, whether it's, for example, you've talked about talent, retaining talent, and just supporting that. And again, with the work that you're doing, how they can better engage these listed companies that they invest in. And you've mentioned long-term. Super funds here in Australia are long-term investors. So it is a relationship worth keeping for sure. And finally, many of our listeners, as I've said, are sustainability leaders working at ASX-listed companies. If they want to get involved with 1% for the planet, what do they need to do? Is that all on your website? Can we share it on our show notes?
Absolutely. Yeah. Please do share it on the website if you go to 1%fortheplanet.org, and you can just click right into our membership page. But I can just share a few things as well, because I think what's really important for businesses to know is you don't have to have it all figured out at the top end. So one of the really important features of 1% for the planet is that in your first year and in every subsequent year, our really awesome team, our staff supports a global membership. We're used to working with companies all over the world, and we really help at every step of the way to figure out what are the giving strategies you want to implement that make the most sense. How do you get the best kind of business lift from it? What are some of the ways that you can make it work in a year that's more challenging than you expected? How do you do this certification thing? We've built a lot of tools. What's the community like? We haven't really talked about that much, but we really invest in building community. I mentioned I was in Seattle just the last couple days doing a regional event. We were in Australia for Climate Action Week in Sydney in March of this year. And we bring people together, and it's really pretty amazing to see and for us often after the fact to learn about the connections between business leaders of our companies who gain so much from each other. Because, in the world that we live in today, to find businesses who are kind of thinking in similar ways, maybe in very different industries, but thinking about how to solve the challenges of being a successful business that's investing in positive impact, it's great to have peers in that space. So being aware that all of those values are there for you. And again, as a new member, you don't have to have that all figured out on day one. Part of joining is gaining access to figuring it out. And then again, I was just talking to one of the members that was with us in Seattle, who's been a member for more than 10 years. And they were saying every year they learn new things. Every year they're figuring new things out, how to engage their employees, how to communicate it more effectively to their customers, how to find the partners that are a better fit as they've grown. So it's an evolving process that every single year you can keep adjusting to really fit what you're doing. So I encourage people to check it out. Our team is ready and waiting to have conversations with you to help make it an easy step to get in the door and then to learn how to make it happen.
Well said. Kate, that's all we have time for today, but we'll certainly share the links on our show notes. But thank you for joining us on a different time zone. It's nighttime your time. It's almost noon for us here. Thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to The Greener Way. I'm your host, Michelle Baltazar. Until the next time.
The Greener Way podcast is a product of FS Sustainability. All information in this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional, legal, or tax advice. Before making any financial decisions, you should read the product disclosure statement, and if necessary, consult a licensed financial professional. For more information, head to the disclaimer page on the FS Sustainability website, fssustainability.com.au.